545 people are watching, pretty good. So welcome everybody. So well, first of all, like, what the heck is it? It's like, can you help us understand, like, what is psychological safety?
So psychological safety describes a climate, an environment, right? And I'm glad this is a team session and team camaraderie, because it is, to me, it's all about the interpersonal context, right? And that happens in groups. That's teams. That's what I talk about as teaming. But so psychological safety describes an environment, a work environment, where people believe that speaking up is feasible, right? And not easy necessarily, but expected, desired, welcome, right? that they believe they can do the hard things, like disagree with the boss, ask a question, admit a mistake. All of those things that most of us are both socialized and against doing, and reluctant to do, simply because we'd rather look good or be liked or get along than to learn and contribute and help.
So maybe one thing you could do is, one of my favorite studies of yours is actually your first study, where you didn't even call it psychological safety, your
No.
1996. So why don't you tell the folks a little bit about, I mean, this study you did with the nurses was remarkable. So, because I mean, that's how you kind of got interested. You stumbled
Absolutely,
accidentally, right?
It was a mistake. It was a big failure, right? So the big failure story. So Richard, who we were talking about, Richard Hackman, had done research on aviation teams, right, to cockpit crews. And among other things, there was research in that stream that showed that better teams, according to a team diagnostic survey that he developed, had made fewer mistakes as teams in the cockpit.
Yeah.
Not necessarily made.
Just to give a little timeout,
Yeah.
Richard, at the age of about 60, 58, sat on the jump seat in the cockpit with planes and coded their behavior. This was not just like, you know, I'm the detached professor. He was in the cockpit with them for like months.
Happily so, right? But
yeah.
so because of this work, when in the early 90s, when some medical researchers who wanted to study error in the healthcare delivery space, in the hospital space, they approached him and said, we think you should come help us and see whether the same is true in hospitals, right? Do sort of better teams make fewer mistakes, because we're pretty interested in medical error. Richard said, I'm a little busy right now, but you can have Amy, basically, with what happened. So to make a long story as short as possible, I set out to kind of replicate, right? I used a variation on the team diagnostic survey. I surveyed a bunch of hospital teams in, month 1. And then I was just sitting still and waiting for 6 months while trained medical investigators collected error rate data. And finally, they had data. They sent it to me, 2 independent sources, really good from a research perspective. I put it together. I ran the correlations, and the thing I first noticed was that I had a significant correlation. Like, I'm really happy now. I'm a first-year graduate student, and I've got a thing. I'm almost picturing that I'm going to publish already. And then I noticed something important, which was that my correlation was in the wrong direction. So what my data seemed to be saying was that the better teams, according to Richard's survey, did not have lower error rates. They had higher error rates. And that was, of course, a stunning failure, right? It wasn't just being wrong. It was like being 100% wrong. And so that I don't know, fear, humiliation, all the things that were going on in my head at that moment, one of which was, how am I going to tell Richard, led me to sit down and think, right? And the thinking revealed the following possibility. Maybe, right? Maybe the better teams aren't making more mistakes. Maybe they're more willing and able to talk about mistakes.